The fog came early that year. It rolled down from the hills before dawn, thick as milk and twice as heavy, swallowing the valley whole. Even the river lost its voice beneath it, reduced to a faint hiss like breath through teeth. By the time morning should have arrived, the world was only gray. No edges, no distances, just sound and scent. In that silence, a boar waited. He stood at the edge of what once had been a pasture, his broad body half hidden by the mist. His coat was dark with mud and frost, his breath rising in clouds that vanished as quickly as they formed. The ground beneath him was soft, thawing after a long freeze. His tusks glimmered faintly when he moved his head, listening. The barns lay ahead of him, three of them slumped and weathered, their roofs sagging under years of neglect. Their wooden ribs creaked softly in the damp, the sound so faint it might have been imagined. But to the boar, it was clear, an old place breathing, speaking in its sleep. He took one step forward, then another, his hooves pressing into the mud with slow deliberation. Each sound was small but certain. Beneath the damp, the earth still remembered warmth. The fog thickened. The barns disappeared, then returned again, as if the land couldn't decide whether to reveal itself. Somewhere inside one of them, a loose shutter knocked in the wind, steady, rhythmic, like a slow heartbeat. The boar paused, head low, ears twitching. His kind had always known the language of barns and fields. Long ago, when men were still frequent here, their scent filled the air, grain, sweat, iron. He remembered the taste of spilled corn, the sound of footsteps on wooden floors, the sting of shouts and gunfire. The memory was old but alive, tucked deep in his blood like a scar that never faded. Now, the barns were empty. The people were gone, but the smell of them lingered, thin, ghostly, yet familiar. He exhaled, a deep rumble rising from his chest. Not fear, not warning, only acknowledgement. Somewhere beyond the barns, a dog barked once, sharp and distant, then stopped. The sound carried through the fog, splitting the silence before dissolving into it again. The boar lifted his head, his nostrils flaring. The wind brought him faint traces, wood smoke, hay, rain not yet fallen. He turned toward the largest barn. Its door was ajar, hanging crooked. The darkness within felt different from the fog outside, denser, more secret. He approached slowly, each breath visible in the chill air. Inside, the air was warmer. Dust hung like mist, stirred by his movement. The scent of old straw and rotted grain filled the space. He pushed deeper in, his hooves muffled by the soft ground. A pigeon fluttered overhead, startled from its perch, the sound of wings echoing faintly between the beams. The boar stopped near the center of the barn. A shaft of light filtered through a hole in the roof, striking the ground like a ghost of sunlight. He stood in it, motionless. The warmth was faint, but real. Outside, the fog pressed against the walls, wrapping the building in silence. The barns creaked again, long and low, like something remembering. Then, from far off, came another sound. Footsteps. Slow, uneven, human. The boar turned his head toward the door, ears pricked. The scent reached him a moment later. Damp wool, smoke, and earth. He didn't move. Through the fog, a figure appeared. A man wrapped in a heavy coat, his hat pulled low. He carried no rifle, only a lantern, its light flickering weakly in the gray air. When he reached the barn door, he stopped and looked inside. The man and the boar regarded each other without sound or movement. The air between them held its breath. "Still here," the man said softly, as if to himself. His voice was hoarse, worn thin by cold. He took a step closer, lantern raised. The light caught the boar's eyes, turning them to molten amber. "You were here before us," he murmured, "and you'll be here after." The boar did not understand the words, but he recognized the tone, the quiet of one creature acknowledging another. His muscles loosened slightly. The man lowered the lantern. "Go on then," he said. "There's nothing left to take." The boar snorted once, a sound deep and steady, then turned away. He walked past the man, out into the fog, his shape dissolving into the gray, until only the faint sound of his hooves remained. The man stood there a long time, staring at the doorway. The fog drifted in and out, brushing against his face. Finally, he turned and looked up at the barn roof. Rain had begun to fall, soft, hesitant, as if testing the earth's patience. The barns groaned, wood swelling under the moisture. It was the sound of old bones remembering how to live. The man smiled faintly, a tired smile, and whispered, "You were right." The rain grew steadier. The fog lifted just enough to reveal the shape of the field, the river, the world returning. And somewhere beyond sight, the boar moved through the gray morning, his breath mingling with the rain, his path as patient and unbroken as time itself. By the second day, the rain had become constant. It was not heavy, not wild, only steady, deliberate, as if it had decided the valley deserved cleansing and would not stop until it was done. The fog thinned but never left. It clung to the low ground, curling around fences and half-buried tools, wrapping the barns in slow breath. The world was smaller now, contained to the few yards one could see, and the sounds that managed to reach through the mist. The man stayed. He had not planned to. When he came to the valley, it was only to see what remained of his grandfather's farm. Just a place, he told himself, a point on a map where stories had started before fading out. But when he stepped inside the barn that first night, he felt something there, quiet but steady, like a heartbeat trapped in the walls. He spent the morning walking the perimeter of what had once been the main yard. The fence was almost gone, reduced to broken posts and rusted wire. Moss covered the stones of the well. Beneath his boots, the ground was soft and black, the air thick with the scent of rot and rain. The barns groaned in the wind. He stopped near the largest one, the same barn where he'd seen the boar. Its door swayed slightly, tapping the frame with a low, rhythmic sound. Inside, it smelled of straw and animal musk, and something else, earth turned by hooves. He knelt by the damp floor and saw the prints. They were large, deep, filled with muddy water. The edges were fresh. He smiled without knowing why. "So you came back," he said quietly. Outside, something shifted. A sound, soft, careful, deliberate. The hairs on his neck rose, not in fear, but recognition. He turned toward the open doorway. The fog was thicker now, but he could see the movement. Slow, dark, solid. The boar stepped into view. Rain slicked his fur, darkening the bristles along his spine. His tusks were dull with mud, his breath heavy in the cold air. He stopped several paces from the man, head low, watching. They stood in silence, two shapes made of the same stillness. The man's voice came low, steady. "You've been guarding this place longer than I ever could." The boar's ears flicked. He snorted once, the sound echoing against the wooden beams. The man didn't move. The air smelled of wet hay and iron. When the boar finally turned, it wasn't to flee. He moved along the side of the barn, nose to the ground, tracing the scent of roots or memory, something the man couldn't name. Then, without hurry, he disappeared into the fog again. The man followed, stopping at the edge of the pasture. The fog swallowed the shape of the animal, leaving only the trail of disturbed grass and the faint warmth of life lingering in the air. That night, the rain grew harder. It drummed on the roof in steady rhythm. The man sat near the small fire he'd built in the corner of the barn, his lantern casting a thin circle of light. Water leaked through the boards in narrow streams, forming silver lines that shimmered on the dirt floor. He thought about leaving in the morning. The valley was no longer a home. It hadn't been for years, but he couldn't quite shake the feeling that the earth still knew his name, even if the world above had forgotten it. He closed his eyes. The smell of the barn, wood, hay, smoke, wrapped around him. Somewhere beyond the walls, he heard movement again. A faint shuffle through wet leaves, a snort, the quiet tearing of roots. He smiled. "You're not afraid of me," he murmured. The fire flickered, low and steady. Outside, the boar stood beneath the skeletal outline of a tree, his massive body half hidden by fog. He could smell the smoke, the the faint warmth that came from places like this. He knew not danger, not hunger, but something like belonging. The rain softened. The barns creaked again, long and low, as if answering to the pulse of the world itself. And when the man finally drifted to sleep, the boar lingered in the dark, unmoving, his breath clouding in the chill air. They were two creatures left behind by time, one rebuilding, one remembering. and for the first night in many years, the valley no longer felt abandoned. When dawn came, the fog had thinned to silver. The rain had stopped, and the earth, damp and dark, waited patiently for the next step, the next sound, the next moment of quiet recognition between man and wild. The barns, heavy with mist, whispered of rain still yet to fall. The valley never truly dried. Even when the clouds broke and sunlight pooled briefly across the fields, the air still tasted of water, of rain hiding just beyond the next ridge, waiting for its return. Thomas had stopped trying to leave. Each morning he woke to the same rhythm, the slow creak of the barns, the smell of wet timber, and the hush of mist moving through the grass. He had learned to keep the fire alive through the night, feeding it small bundles of straw to fight the damp. The warmth didn't travel far, but it was enough to make the mornings bearable. He had begun mending the roof. The largest barn was half sound, its beams sturdy despite the years, its floor soft but forgiving. He climbed the rafters slowly, testing each plank with care. Every board that held beneath his weight felt like a conversation with the past. By mid-morning, the fog had lifted enough for him to see the far line of trees. There was motion there, faint and deliberate, a shape passing through the gray, steady as the breath of the earth itself. The boar. He had come again. Thomas stopped working and crouched on the rafters, watching. The animal moved with the same unhurried certainty as before, his bulk softened by distance. He crossed the field in silence, nose low to the ground, following some invisible line that only he could sense. The man descended and stood at the barn door, leaning on the frame. "You keep your patrol," he said quietly. "I'll keep mine." The boar stopped near the fence, head lifted slightly. His small dark eyes caught a glint of sunlight. Sharp, brief, gone again. The two watched each other from across the damp space, neither claiming nor surrendering it. The wind shifted. Thomas could smell him now. Earth, moss, and rain-soaked fur. A scent older than any map. He lowered his gaze. "You were here before the fences," he said. "Maybe you're the only one who still remembers what it was like." The boar's ears twitched. He turned, snorted softly, and wandered toward the orchard, where the last of the fallen apples had melted into the soil. He rooted there for a while, slow and methodical, before disappearing into the trees. That night, Thomas dreamed of the farm as it once was. Golden light spilling from the barns, the air alive with insects, his grandfather's voice calling from somewhere unseen. In the dream, the boar stood at the edge of the orchard, not as a threat, but as something watchful, belonging. When he woke, the fire had gone out and rain was beginning again. He rose, stirred the embers, and stepped outside. The night was dark, the fog low and restless. He could see almost nothing, but he could hear the soft rustle of grass, the dull thud of hooves against mud. "You again," Thomas whispered. A shadow moved beyond the nearest fence, large and steady. The boar paused there, barely visible in the shifting gray. His breath rose like smoke, catching the faintest glimmer of lantern light. Thomas stood still, listening. The air between them vibrated with a strange kind of peace, the kind born not from understanding but from acceptance. The boar exhaled a long, low sound. Low. Then he turned and began to walk the length of the fence, his outline dissolving and reforming in the fog. He didn't wander far this time, only circled the barns, slow and deliberate, as though inspecting their recovery. When Thomas went back inside, he left the door open. Rain whispered against the roof, and the steady rhythm of hooves moved once more through the distance. He sat by the dying fire and listened until the sound faded completely. By dawn, the ground was covered in fresh prints, wide, deep, purposeful. They ringed the barns like a boundary, neither warning nor invitation. Thomas traced one with his hand. The mud was cool, still damp from the rain. "You watch, I'll build," he murmured. "Seems fair." The fog began to lift again, revealing the shape of the valley. Soft hills, wet fields, the barns standing a little straighter than before. The boar was nowhere in sight, but his presence lingered. The air itself felt different now, steadier, like the world had agreed, silently, to let the place live again. When the sun broke through, just for a moment, It caught on the wet wood and made the barn shimmer faintly. The light was brief, but it was enough. And in that fragile glow, Thomas thought he heard the barns whisper once more. Not in words, but in the slow, patient language of things that remember how to endure. Spring did not arrive all at once. It crept in softly, like something unsure of its welcome. The rain slowed, the fog thinned, and the air began to taste faintly of grass instead of rot. Each morning, Thomas woke to birdsong again, tentative, scattered, as though the forest itself was testing the sound. The barns no longer moaned with every gust of wind. Their beams, once swollen and gray, had dried to a deep, rich brown. He spent his days outside now. The land was still too heavy to plow, but there was work enough in mending what time had broken. He rebuilt one of the smaller fences, replacing rotted wood with whatever could still be salvaged. The rhythm of hammer and breath became its own kind of prayer. Every afternoon, the boar returned. At first, Thomas only saw him at a distance, moving along the tree line, crossing the creek, circling the barns with the same patient precision as before. But as the days lengthened, he began to come earlier, lingering longer. He never approached too close, but he no longer hid. The man grew used to his presence the way one grows used to weather, something to be respected, not questioned. One morning, Thomas found new tracks beside the boar's, smaller ones, uneven. He crouched, tracing them with his fingers. "So that's why you waited," he said softly. The air smelled of thawing soil and wild onion. He followed the prints across the field, stopping near the orchard where the grass was just beginning to turn green. There, beneath a leaning apple tree, the boar stood with two younger shapes pressed close to his side, piglets, thin, striped, their fur like rippled bark. They rooted clumsily at the ground, snuffling through damp leaves, the way young creatures learn the world, one scent at a time. Thomas stopped several paces away. The boar lifted his head but did not move. His small eyes were dark and steady, his breath slow. The younger ones paused, sensing the stillness, then continued rooting again without fear. The man smiled. "You're not guarding this place," he murmured. "You're raising it." For a while they stayed like that, 3 wild lives and 1 quiet witness, all sharing the same slow, fragile moment, beneath a sky still too pale to promise anything. Later, when the rain came again, it was warm this time. Thomas worked in the barn, patching the gaps in the roof. The sound of rain on wood was no longer mournful. It was gentle, rhythmic, alive. Through the open door, he saw the boar moving across the field, the piglets trailing behind him in an uneven line. The fog rose from the grass, curling around their legs. They vanished into it, reappeared near the fence, then vanished again. Thomas kept watching until they were gone, then went back to work. The smell of rain filled the air, thick and sweet. That evening, he sat outside as the clouds broke and light spilled through. The barns glowed softly in the dusk, their wet wood catching the last of the sun. The valley seemed to exhale. He thought of the first day he had come here, the silence, the fog, the sound of that first creak in the old beams. Now there was movement everywhere. Birds darting through the orchard, frogs calling by the creek, the faint rustle of small things learning to live again. The world was returning, and he understood now that he was not rebuilding it alone. The boar would come again, he knew. Maybe tomorrow, maybe the next rain. Not to visit, not to guard, but simply to exist in the same space, to walk the same ground, to remind the earth of its own pulse. Thomas looked up. The sky was gray again, but it no longer felt empty. Clouds gathered like quiet thoughts, full of promise, heavy with life. He whispered, "You waited long enough." We both did. The barns creaked softly in reply. Somewhere beyond the orchard, the boar snorted once, a deep, grounding sound, and the wind carried it across the wet grass, through the broken fence, into the open air. It was not farewell and not beginning. It was something simpler, older, an understanding without words, shared by those who remain when everything else has gone. The fog would come again, the rain would return, and the barns would whisper as they always had. But now, the valley listened back, and beneath that gray sky, Alive and heavy with silence, man and beast kept their quiet watch over the place that had finally remembered itself.